Hi, my name is Aaron, this is my show Reeducation, and today we're going to talk a little bit more about the banning of assault rifles. Now, earlier on in this series, I had a video where I was talking about how the Justin Trudeau government here in Canada, my home country, is planning on banning assault weapons. Well, they are currently doing that as we speak. And I also talked, just in the very last video in this series, about how we never question whether or not the state should or shouldn't have guns. We only ever question whether or not the citizens should. So we're going to talk a lot about those things. We're going to go into some great detail about those certain things. And at the end, we're going to talk about some pretty terrifying stories that I've heard involving the militarization and the advancement of the police state in regards to their ability to protect millionaires and billionaires. It's complicated. You'll see what I have to say about it in a second. With all that being said, let's get started. Okay, so the very first thing that we're going to do is we're going to talk a little bit about the Canadian assault rifle ban that is currently happening. Now, if you're from the United States or from anywhere else far off in the world, obviously, a lot of these things might not apply to you, but some of them very well might. And the broader picture that I'm going to paint with this whole story pertains to basically all of us. So I'm just going to use Canada, like I said, my home country, my hometown, as an example of this. And with all that being said, I'll start off by talking a little bit about the assault rifle ban that is currently happening. Now, Justin Trudeau and his Liberal government, an entity that has absolutely no understanding of how firearms work and operate, have tasked themselves to ban all assault rifles so they can protect the citizens, assumably. Now, in one of my previous videos, I asked the question what exactly an assault rifle was, and I was unable to find an answer because the Canadian government has not necessarily defined what an assault rifle is. So what exactly is an assault rifle? Well, like I said in my previous video, nobody knows. It's not really a thing that exists. The word assault rifle actually came from the German word Sturmgewehr. I'm probably pronouncing that wrong. And it literally translated to assault rifle way back in Hitler's Germany. And ever since that time, people have been trying to use that word to define certain characteristics of guns that they personally find to be scary. And that's really what makes the difference between an assault rifle and any other gun. But through some digging, I was able to find some defining features for what some people would call an assault-style weapon. And it has to do with having rapid-fire capabilities, like being fully automatic, having a detachable box magazine, which basically means the little box that all the bullets go into that snaps into the bottom. A lot of people call it a clip. It's not a clip. If it's able to come out of the gun, that's a defining feature. If it's stuck inside the gun, if it's, say, a tubular magazine, that's apparently a defining feature. And the third thing is that it has to be a mid-power rifle. I'm not really sure if that's a specific defining feature of an assault-style weapon, but from what I've been able to find, most assault-style weapons usually fire a mid-power cartridge. So you're going to be talking about things that are just a little bit more powerful than pistol cartridges, but not quite as powerful as hunting rounds. Of course, there are some exceptions. For instance, the AK-47 platform, which usually fires a round known as the 7.62 by 39, which is a semi-high-powered, not really high-powered, but, you know, higher-powered round than, say, a typical United States military service rifle, which usually fires the 5.56 NATO, which is a smaller round, but it has like a much higher velocity with a much tinier projectile. So it's a mid-power round, whereas you can find higher-powered rounds in the AK-47 platform and so on, but you don't have as high of a power round as you would in a lot of hunting rifles. Now, of course, all of that being said, none of this actually matters because they're not actually banning weapons in Canada based off of these specific criteria. They're not banning weapons based off of assault-style weapon criteria. They're banning weapons based off of make, model, and type. They're banning things like the AK-47 platform and the M16 platform, a lot of which were already banned, but now they're also banning a lot of the outliers. If you've seen my previous videos, a lot of the ones that I was talking about that were specifically named that you could own, such as the Ruger Mini 14, those platforms are now being banned specifically by name as well. But they're not stopping there, because they're also banning any weapon that has more than, I believe, 10,000 joules of energy, which ends up referring to a lot of large bore hunting rifles. And guess what? They're also banning 10 and 12 gauge shotguns. Weapons that are specifically, intentfully used for hunting. Now, I'm not going to, in this video, make any sort of argument towards whether or not we should only have weapons for hunting or whether we should have them for any other reason, because that's not really the argument I'm going to make here. But it is interesting that just a couple of days ago, they were talking about how they weren't going to be banning any weapons in regards to hunting at all, and now they're specifically targeting weapons that are specifically used for hunting. I believe they're also completely banning all pistols, and guess what? None of this has to do with any of the criteria that they laid out when they were referring to assault-style weapons, and it also doesn't have anything to do with what they're blaming all of this on. Now, they're saying, the liberal government that is, they're saying that all of these gun laws should be put in place because there's a lot of people that are being shot by these guns, and if we put in laws that ban these guns, then we're going to stop a lot of the people from being shot by these guns because we're taking them out of the hands of the criminals. And what exactly? Because we know that those damn dirty criminals are going to do criminal stuff, and as soon as they get their hands on those guns, they're going to be criminal guns, and they're going to do criminal things with those criminal guns, and oh, the crime, oh, the crime, oh, the humanity. Yeah. Now, obviously, I'm extremely dismissive of their arguments because I believe they don't actually have any. Of course, they have the argument of, if we ban all of these guns, then it's going to be less likely that some people are going to end up with them, and they're going to be less likely to shoot people with them. Well, let's talk about some numbers. Canada, for the most part, doesn't have a gun culture like the United States. We respect them, and we treat them like tools. And in that, we don't have nearly as high of a number of mass shootings as the United States does. They are an outlier, but because they're so close to Canada, they make us feel like everything is happening here as well. So when something does happen here, all of a sudden, everybody gets this visceral reaction where they feel like they need to do something immediately, and they immediately jump to the one thing that doesn't actually help. Like I said, I'll lay out the numbers. In Canada, there has been 249 homicides in the year of 2018. Now, that doesn't include suicides, but usually suicides account for about 60% of all gun violence that happens. Now, handguns are, for the most part, what people commit the most homicides with a total of 143 deaths in 2018. Rifles or shotguns, just regular rifles or shotguns, account for 56 deaths. Fully automatic weapons, which would be in the realm of these assault weapons, account for, wait for it, 2 deaths per year. Usually every year it's about 2 deaths. It has been as high as 6 deaths in the last 5 years, but usually 2 deaths a year from fully automatic weapons. Sawed-off weapons such as shotguns and rifles account for 18 deaths in the year of 2018, and 30 deaths are accounted to other, so I assume somebody's blowing themselves up with a fucking potato gun. So going off of the idea that we would be banning assault-style weapons, which again we aren't, we're banning any kind of weapon that they deem offensive, the specific weapon by name, but assuming that we were only banning assault-style weapons, the only weapon that is on there that is under the classification of assault-style weapon, which is, a fully automatic weapon that has rapid-fire capabilities, a detachable box magazine, while using a mid-power round equates to 2, count them, 2 deaths per year. The largest culprit of all of these weapons is handguns, which is, obvious, with 143 deaths per year, because usually people acquire handguns because they use them for protection. Most of the time, the people that have handguns are people that live in the city, in urban areas, and they're protecting themselves because they have a lot of the time no other choice. Now here's the thing though, we can't just simply look at those numbers because they don't really tell us a whole lot. But what we can do is look into the numbers and look into the laws that pertain to those numbers. And when we're talking about handguns, the most used weapon in all of the crimes, we're talking about something that in Canada is already prohibited. It's already illegal for you to carry one around with you. You can't carry a handgun with you out of the house. You can't take it with you at all. In fact, you need special paperwork and consent from the government to even transport the thing from your house to a specific range. And if you even make one stop along the way, you are in violation of that transport order and you can go to jail. So people are already committing 143 murders per year, homicides per year, roughly, in 2018, with handguns that they were using illegally. So making more laws doesn't stop them from using them illegally. Now, the interesting thing about that is most of the criminals that got these guns also got them illegally. Where did they get them? Where everybody in North America gets guns, and in South America too, in fact, from the United States. They're one of the largest gun producers in the entire world, and certainly the largest in all of the Americas. So a lot of criminals get a lot of their guns from the United States because they're readily available. Like I said in my last video about this, the Canadian-United States border is almost entirely unprotected. You can cartwheel across it at times. Most of it is only divided by a cut line in some trees. So it's really easy to transport a lot of illegal weapons across that border, and even if they were to have a fence like they do across the United States-Mexico border, they would still transport those weapons in planes or in boats, or they'd dig holes or they'd climb the fence. People will find a way, because whenever you ban weapons, they find them on the black market. And that brings me to the whole thing that broke the camel's back, the single last straw that snapped that poor damn camel's back with these liberals and wanting to ban all of these guns. It has to do with a recent mass shooting. Now, I'm not going to name this person. I'm just going to refer to them by the pseudonym of Asshole. Now, Asshole decided to do something very heinous, and I'm not going to talk about the specifics of it because the specifics don't really have anything to do with the laws that are being passed right now. But what I will talk about is how this person already was illegally owning these firearms. They had absolutely, according to the police, no firearms license at all, which means they weren't legally allowed to own a firearm, and they weren't legally allowed to purchase the rounds that they needed to put in that firearm. Also, on top of that, they didn't have any formal training, at least not from what they were able to find. The local range has absolutely no record of this person, so they didn't legally go get any training either. So they illegally obtained the firearm, they illegally found rounds for that firearm, and they illegally found ways to train themselves to use that firearm, all the while breaking every single law that was already in place. Now, what kind of weapon did he use? Well, the news is very sparse on that issue. They talk about how he brought a long barrel rifle, but they don't talk whether or not it was an assault-style weapon or not. Because, in my personal opinion, it wasn't. If it was, it would be all over the news. Assault-style weapon found. AK-47 platform or M16 platform found. Ooh, spooky scary. This scary black rifle was found inside of this person's vehicle and we have to tell everybody about it. But no, they didn't say that, did they? They said that they found a long barrel rifle. If they don't give the specifics, that usually means they're trying to hide something, in my semi-professional opinion. And in my semi-professional opinion, they're trying to hide that thing because they wanted a reason to pass all of these new laws and new legislations to take away your rights and disarm the population. It wasn't just a long barrel rifle that asshole used either. It was also a pistol, a handgun. And where did they get that handgun? They got it from the police. They stole it from a police officer that they gunned down. So they illegally obtained a long barrel rifle, they illegally obtained the ammunition for it, and then they gunned down a police officer and illegally obtained that weapon. But for some reason we never talk about how we should be disarming the police, because it's an easy target for people like that to just go and steal their weapons and use them against everybody else. This brings me to the whole point that I brought up at the very beginning when I was talking about how we never talk about how the state is militarizing themselves. We never talk about how they're acquiring more weapons and more training and all of these things. We only ever talk about how we should be disarming the population. Now, obviously, there are ways, real ways, that we can solve gun problems. If people are committing suicides at an incredibly high rate with guns, banning the guns doesn't necessarily solve that problem, but what would is giving those people reasons to live. Like fixing the economy, making their lives a little bit better, giving them jobs that they don't hate and that they can enjoy and that actually give them fulfillment and can pay their bills. Or, maybe increasing the mental health care industry and giving them therapy and actually fixing these problems instead of just batting at the symptoms. We can fix gun problems by focusing on what causes gun crime. If criminals are using these guns in crimes, then maybe, just maybe, fixing the economic systems that are making these criminals into criminals in the first place might be a better place to start rather than just banning guns. Again, if you ban the guns, you create a black market. Prohibition creates black markets and it increases gun sales. So if you ban the guns, more guns will be sold to more criminals and so on and so on. If people are using guns in armed robberies, then maybe fixing the people's socioeconomic status so they don't need to steal to survive might be a way to solve those gun crimes. Or if these criminals are committing crimes because they're addicted to drugs, maybe solving the reasons why they're addicted to drugs might be a way to fix that problem as well. But that's not what they're trying to do here. They're not trying to fix the problem of people acquiring guns and using them. If they were, then they would be using comprehensive methods that actually did something to fix these problems. But instead, they're banning them, creating a black market. They're not putting this legislation out along with an education campaign informing people on how they can properly use, store, and safely operate guns. They're not putting this legislation out with a complete reform of the economic system, giving people the ability to actually elevate their standard of living so they don't feel the need to commit suicides or to commit gun crimes in general. They're not putting out this legislation along with any real justice reform in regards to the drug epidemic. They're still criminalizing people that are doing drugs outside of marijuana specifically, and they're making those people into criminals and making those people have to literally steal so they can get their fix. They're not putting out this legislation along with a reform of the healthcare industry and the Medicare industry so they can actually, create a system where people aren't forced to have to spend exuberant amounts of money, resulting in them not being able to afford the prescriptions that they need, putting them out onto the streets, having to buy all of these medications that they would usually get that was made in an actual laboratory and not by some asshole in their basement. But they're not doing any of those things. They're banning the guns because they want to disarm the population. If they didn't want to disarm the population, they wouldn't be specifically doing these reforms and nothing else. They never talk about the other things. They never think about the other measures. But they do that on purpose. It's not a bug, it's a feature, because it solves the problem that the elites are having, and it disarms the population, that would otherwise be ready to revolt against them. Now, I've said in other videos in the past, specifically about guns, that it's interesting that we are constantly propagandized to, as leftists, that we should be against gun rights, and we should always think that gun laws and banning guns is somehow a solution to the problem. And the people on the right are constantly propagandized to believe that they should have gun freedom and that they should own their guns and use them if the government ever gets tyrannical or if they ever needed them in some sort of civil war. That's literally how they're marketed towards them. So the leftists, the people that would usually be on the side of a people's reform, an uprising, a revolt, a revolution, are persuaded to not own any firearms. Whereas the people on the right, the ones that are propagandized to support the state and to support the government structures, are propagandized to own all of the guns. And not just own them, but vehemently fight against anybody that would stand against their freedom. It's all just a spectacle to disarm the population. Now, I understand a lot of you are going to jump to the idea that I must be a conspiracy theorist and I must be coming up with these crazy ideas that the government is trying to disarm the population because what? Do you think that they're going to, kill us all? No, I don't think they're going to kill us all. What I do think is that a disarmed population is easier to control. And if you've watched the trends over the last few years, it's fairly obvious that they're getting ready for something. You can probably look as far back as 10 years ago, but specifically let's focus on 2014. Again, we'll focus on Canada because the United States is a shit show and it's already done all of these things to an extremely high degree for many, many years. So all of the things that I'm talking about here when referring to Canada, basically take those ideas, those concepts, and exacerbate them to about 1,000 and you have the United States. Since 2014, they've been acquiring military equipment, such as assault rifles, sound cannons, Cougar LAVs, or light armored vehicles, and this is happening all across Canada. For example, these Cougar LAVs, or LAVs, light armored vehicles, have been given out to Ottawa, Winnipeg, Medicine Hat, Toronto, basically all of the big cities all across the entire country now have an armored vehicle that is very similar to a tank. They're also arming a lot of these individuals with military-style weapons, such as the Colt C8 Patrol Carbide, which is basically an M16 variant, something that you are not legally allowed to own at all, but of course the state is legally allowed to own it because they know what's right for us. Also, since the G summits and other events that have happened, the Canadian military have specifically been training the police force all across Canada to learn military tactics. So they're giving them military equipment, military vehicles, military rifles, and military training, all because of what? Why else would they be getting equipment, vehicles, and weapons that are made for war if they weren't planning on going to war? Like I said at the beginning of this video, I'm not going to make an argument on whether or not we should have these weapons for hunting. I don't give any fucks at all about whether or not we need them for hunting. My fear and my concern is that we are fully arming with militarized weapons the state, the same state that has completely decimated minority cultures all across the entirety of this colonized land. It has brutally and violently attacked the Native American cultures all across the entire country, specifically when they do any form of protest. When they protest against pipelines that are owned and controlled by millionaires and billionaires and the elites. When they protest onto the further encroachment onto their territory and onto their lands, they're fought tooth and nail by violent oppression. And they do this everywhere. They do this in every single country. They do this in every single state all across the United States. They do this in every single province all across Canada. They do this all across Europe and Asia and everywhere. If you are standing up for your rights, if you're standing up against the state authority, they are going to try to stomp you out. And that's why they're preparing for war. They're not preparing for war with an enemy across the sea. They're preparing for war with the people. And it's a whole lot easier to wage a war against an enemy when that enemy has preemptively been disarmed. Now, I'm going to finish up by reading a story that I heard about a couple of weeks ago from The Guardian. And if this doesn't nail home the importance of the people to own and bear firearms, I'm not exactly sure what will. Now, I'm not going to read the whole article. I'm just going to give you an excerpt from it, and it goes a little something like this. The CEO of a brokerage house explained that he had nearly completed building his own underground bunker system and asked, "How do I maintain authority over my security force after this climate collapse?" His concern was, okay, he's got a bunker, he's going to put his family in there, and he's going to have a security force. But his main concern was, how was he going to keep authority over them? In abject panic, with every man out for himself, how does he maintain the boss relationship? And they wanted to know, how are they going to pay the servants if there isn't going to be any money? Because they all think that a full-fledged economic collapse is coming. Remember, this is in 2018. They all knew that this full-fledged economic collapse, the one that we're in currently, was coming. They already knew. And they were preparing by building bunkers and talking about how they're going to hire security forces. They all knew that this was coming, along with, quote, a climate collapse that's going to cause the end of the earth. And they're serious. Quote, they knew armed guards would be required to protect their compounds from the angry mobs, but how were they going to pay the guards once money was worthless? What would stop these guards from choosing their own leader? Quote, the billionaires considered using special combination locks on the food supply that only they knew. Or, and this, folks, is where it gets absolutely horrifying, or, quote, making guards wear disciplinary collars of some kind in return for their survival. Meaning, if a guard or employee went off the reservation, the boss could zap him and get him back on track, or kill him if they so wanted to. That's what they have planned. Like I've said in many videos in the past, they've already built their underground bunkers. They're already coming up with incredibly clever new ways of finding how they can survive while still enslaving us, while still oppressing us, while still keeping their control over every single one of us. If this is something that scares you, that's completely understandable. I think that's something that all of us should have, a healthy amount of fear, specifically when it comes to arming the state, unfettered, and allowing them to have all of the authority while taking away all of ours. I think that all of us right now should be taking into consideration that the state does not have our best interests in mind. The state is there to protect the ruling class. It always has been. And the ruling class have absolutely no interest in protecting us. They only have an interest in protecting themselves. So we have to protect ourselves. And allowing the state to take away any ability that we have to do that is inevitably going to lead to tyranny. At least that's the way I look at it. If you do get a chance, please check out all of the links in the description box below. Hit that little bell button so you don't miss any of the videos that I put out. And thank you very much for watching.